Peace be with you. Before we continue, take a moment to anchor yourself in this space. Subscribe to this channel so you remain connected to messages that nourish your faith. Write one word in the comments that reflects what these moments of nighttime awakening feel like for you. Share this message with someone who often wakes in the dark without understanding why, and stay until the very end, because something meaningful awaits those who do not leave early. Now, without unnecessary formalities, let us go straight into the heart of this moment. There are times when silence carries more meaning than the loudest voices, moments when the absence of noise becomes a language in itself. It is often during these moments, when the world is asleep, when streets are empty, when conversations are paused and responsibilities temporarily lose their grip, that something within you stirs with unexpected clarity. You may have experienced it yourself, waking between 3 and 5 in the morning without any obvious cause. Your body tired, but your inner being alert, your thoughts unusually focused, or your heart quietly restless. This awakening does not feel chaotic, nor does it feel accidental. It feels intentional, as though you have been gently drawn out of sleep rather than forced awake. If this has happened to you, it is important to understand that this moment should not be dismissed as meaningless. It is not always the result of stress, habit, or biological rhythm. Very often it is something far more deliberate, a spiritual invitation that asks for awareness rather than explanation. God does not awaken a heart randomly. When he stirs someone in the deepest hours of the night, it is because those hours hold a unique quality that the day cannot offer. During daylight, the human mind is crowded with tasks, interactions, noise, and constant stimulation. Even moments of prayer are often filtered through urgency, distraction, or routine. But in the stillness of the night, when defenses are lowered and control is relaxed, the soul becomes more receptive. The absence of external voices creates space for an inner attentiveness that is difficult to access when the day is in motion. This is why these hours feel different. They are not dramatic or overwhelming. They are quiet, subtle, and deeply personal. The night does not compete for your attention. It invites it. Between 3 and 5 in the morning, the atmosphere itself seems to shift. The world feels paused, as though time has slowed enough for deeper truths to surface. In this space, God does not need to raise his voice. He does not rush. He does not overwhelm. He draws near in a way that respects your freedom and your vulnerability. This is not a moment designed to impress you with power, but to meet you with presence. Many people misunderstand these awakenings because they expect immediate clarity or instruction. Yet God often begins with closeness rather than answers. He invites you to simply be aware, to recognize that something sacred is unfolding even if you cannot yet name it. These moments are not primarily about doing, they are about positioning. They ask a quiet question of the heart. Are you willing to remain present without fully understanding? To listen without demanding explanation? To stay awake in spirit even when the body longs for comfort? The invitation is gentle, but it is real. You can ignore it, roll over, distract yourself, or push it aside as inconvenient. Or you can pause, breathe, and acknowledge that you have been called into a space where the noise of the world no longer interferes. This is where many transformations begin, not with dramatic encounters, but with simple availability. Often these awakenings occur during seasons of inner change, moments when something in your life is being reshaped beneath the surface. You may not yet see the evidence of it during the day, but at night, when everything else falls silent, your soul becomes aware that something is moving. God frequently works in the unseen long before anything becomes visible, and the night is where this unseen work is most easily perceived. This is why the experience can feel both peaceful and unsettling at the same time. Peaceful because God is near. Unsettling because something within you knows that remaining the same is no longer an option. If you have found yourself waking in these hours, do not rush to label the experience or strip it of meaning. Do not fear it, and do not trivialize it. This quiet intersection between night and dawn is often one of the most honest meeting places between God and the human heart. As we continue, you will begin to understand not only why these moments happen, but what they awaken within you, and how responding to them with attentiveness can slowly, almost imperceptibly, reshape the way you walk through the rest of your life. There are moments when the soul needs to be gently guided into stillness before it can truly listen, and this is one of those moments. Before going any further, pause for just a breath, not to escape your thoughts, but to allow them to settle. Let your shoulders relax. Let your inner tension loosen its grip. This is not a moment to rush through or to perform. It is a moment to become available. In the quiet of your heart, allow this prayer to rise naturally, without force or expectation. Lord, in this calm space, I make myself available to you. If you awaken me in the night, it is not to disturb my rest, but to draw closer to me. Quiet my thoughts, still my fears, and open my spirit to your presence. Let this moment be a place of meeting rather than questioning, a place of trust rather than resistance. As these words settle within you, understand that availability is not weakness. It is strength expressed through humility. To make yourself available to God is not to surrender your identity, but to allow it to be aligned. Many people long to hear God speak, yet few are willing to create the inner silence required to receive his voice. Availability is not about effort, it is about openness. It is the decision to stop striving and to simply be present, trusting that God knows how to approach a listening heart. When the night covers everything and distractions fade into the background, the human spirit enters a different state of awareness. The absence of noise does not create emptiness. It creates sensitivity. During the day, the mind is constantly filtering information, reacting to responsibilities, and navigating external demands. But when the night arrives, especially in the deepest hours when activity ceases, the soul is no longer pulled in multiple directions. This is often when God chooses to speak, not because he prefers darkness, but because silence removes competition. In this stillness, God calls not those who are flawless, but those who are receptive. Perfection has never been the qualification for divine encounter. Willingness has. When you awaken during these hours, it may be an invitation to stand before God without pretense, without roles, without the need to appear strong or composed. It is an invitation to come as you are, without masks, without agitation, without rehearsed words. In these moments, God is not impressed by eloquence or performance. He responds to sincerity. The night strips away the layers that the day builds, and what remains is the true posture of the heart. This is why these awakenings can feel both gentle and intense. They bring you face to face with yourself in God's presence. God often uses these quiet hours to invite intercession that goes beyond understanding. Sometimes the awakening is not about you at all, but about someone else whose situation has not yet reached the surface. There are moments when God stirs a heart to pray for an unseen danger, a coming decision, a soul under pressure, or a situation that requires spiritual covering. The person being prayed for may never know what took place, and the one who prays may never see immediate results, yet something shifts in the unseen. This is the nature of spiritual invitation. It is rarely accompanied by explanation. God does not always reveal the reason before the response. He invites first, then unfolds meaning over time. To answer this invitation is to trust that obedience does not require full visibility. Many of the most significant spiritual acts occur quietly, without witnesses, without recognition, without tangible evidence in the moment. The night teaches the heart to act without applause, to pray without proof, and to trust without reassurance. Before God ever acts publicly, he always works privately. This pattern is woven throughout spiritual history and is deeply embedded in the way transformation unfolds. The most profound changes do not happen under observation. They happen in hidden places where the soul is exposed and unguarded. Night awakenings can be moments when God shapes character rather than circumstances, when he refines faith rather than fixing problems, when he addresses the inner life rather than external outcomes. This shaping process is not always comfortable because it requires honesty. In the stillness of the night, there is no crowd to blend into, no activity to distract from what lies beneath the surface. God uses this time to reveal what needs healing, what needs releasing, and what needs strengthening. It is a silent school. There is no role to maintain and no image to protect. There is only you and God, meeting without intermediaries. This is where authenticity is no longer optional. The night does not tolerate pretension. It exposes reality. God does not bring this exposure to shame you, but to free you. Healing cannot occur where truth is hidden, and growth cannot happen where identity is divided. These moments of awakening can bring unresolved emotions, unspoken fears, or long-ignored questions to the surface, not as accusations, but as invitations. God is not interested in pointing out flaws for condemnation. He is interested in revealing them for transformation. What is brought into the light of his presence can be restored. What remains buried remains powerful. The night, in its quiet honesty, becomes a place where healing begins not with effort, but with acknowledgement. This process of formation is slow, intentional, and deeply personal. God does not rush it, and he does not force it. He shapes the soul gently, like a craftsman working with care rather than haste. Faith is not refined through noise, but through stillness. Trust is not built through constant answers, but through consistent presence. In the secret place of the night, the soul learns to rest in God without needing immediate results. This is where dependence replaces control and surrender replaces striving. Many people desire spiritual depth without realizing that depth is formed in unseen spaces. The night becomes a training ground where faith matures quietly, away from comparison and competition. Here, God teaches the heart to listen more than speak, to receive more than demand, and to remain faithful even when clarity is incomplete. As God shapes in the secret, he also realigns priorities. The night reveals what truly matters because it removes the distractions that often distort perspective. What feels urgent during the day often fades in importance during these hours, while what has been neglected suddenly feels significant. This is not coincidence. It is alignment. God uses these moments to recalibrate the heart, to bring it back to what is essential rather than what is loud. When the soul is no longer stimulated by constant input, it becomes aware of what it has been carrying beneath the surface. Some awakenings bring peace, others bring restlessness, but both serve a purpose. Peace reveals presence, and restlessness reveals areas that require attention. Neither is wasted when received with openness. The invitation to availability is ongoing. It is not limited to a single night or a single experience. Each awakening builds sensitivity, teaching the soul to recognize God's nearness without needing dramatic signs. Over time, the heart becomes more attuned, more discerning, more responsive. What once felt confusing begins to feel familiar. What once felt intrusive begins to feel intentional. This is not because the awakenings change, but because the heart does. Responsiveness deepens, trust strengthens, and fear loosens its hold. The night becomes less about interruption and more about communion, less about uncertainty and more about alignment. God's work in the secret is never wasted. What is shaped in the unseen eventually influences what is lived in the visible. Character refined in silence sustains strength in public. Faith formed in the night anchors endurance in the day. Decisions shaped in stillness guide action and motion. Though these moments may feel isolated, their impact is far-reaching. The soul that learns to listen in silence learns to walk with clarity. The heart that allows itself to be shaped without resistance becomes resilient without hardness. God's formation does not produce fragility, it produces depth. If you find yourself awakened in these hours, understand that you are not being singled out for discomfort, but being invited into intimacy. This invitation does not demand perfection, eloquence, or spiritual expertise. It asks only for presence, to sit quietly, to listen attentively, to remain open. In doing so, you step into a process that cannot be rushed or replicated. It is deeply personal, uniquely tailored, and gently guided. God does not awaken you to overwhelm you. He awakens you to prepare you. What he forms in the silence of the night becomes the foundation upon which the strength of the day is built. The human day is saturated with voices. From the moment consciousness returns in the morning, the mind is pulled into motion. Decisions to make, responsibilities to manage, conversations to process, expectations to meet. The soul is frequently exhausted not from physical effort alone, but from constant mental engagement. Yet paradoxically, it is in the deepest hours of the night, when the body is at rest and the world is quiet, that the soul becomes most capable of hearing with clarity. Before dawn, when the pace of life has fully paused, the distractions that cloud perception dissolve, and the inner ear becomes attentive again. God does not compete with noise. He waits for it to fade. This is why his voice is so often recognized in the stillness rather than in the rush, in the quiet rather than in the chaos. He does not force attention. He invites it. God does not shout over the noise of the world. He whispers into the quiet of the heart. His communication is rarely dramatic, rarely overwhelming, and almost never coercive. It comes gently, like a thought that carries weight, like an impression that lingers, like a sense of knowing that cannot be easily explained but cannot be ignored either. In the early hours before dawn, this whisper becomes clearer, not because God speaks louder, but because the soul is finally still enough to listen. In these moments, God may place a direction that brings clarity where confusion once reigned, or an inner warning that gently redirects a path before harm occurs. Sometimes he brings to remembrance a promise long forgotten, buried under disappointment or delay, and revives it with renewed assurance. At other times, he offers nothing more than a deep, unexplainable peace that settles the heart without words, yet speaks volumes. These encounters may feel subtle, but their impact is profound. What is received in silence often shapes everything that follows in motion. These moments before dawn have the power to orient not only a single day, but entire seasons of life. A thought received in the night can influence a decision made weeks later. A quiet conviction formed in stillness can redirect years of habit. God's guidance does not always arrive as a clear command. Often it begins as a gentle alignment, a subtle shift in perception that changes how one sees, responds, and chooses. The soul that listens in the night begins to walk with greater clarity in the day, not because every step is explained, but because direction has been received at a deeper level. This is why ignoring these moments can lead to confusion, while honoring them fosters discernment. The world speaks loudly and persistently, but God speaks intentionally. His voice is not constant noise. It is precise communication, and precision requires silence. Listening before dawn is not about seeking mystical experiences or dramatic revelations. It is about cultivating attentiveness. The soul that learns to recognize God's whisper learns to distinguish it from fear, imagination, and impulse. This discernment develops over time through repeated moments of quiet listening rather than forced interpretation. God does not rush the process. He values depth over speed, clarity over volume. In the stillness of the night, the heart is trained to recognize his voice, not through external signs, but through internal resonance. What he speaks aligns with peace, truth, and conviction, rather than anxiety or urgency. This is how the soul learns to trust what it hears. The night becomes a place of calibration, where the inner compass is realigned and spiritual sensitivity is sharpened. Yet these moments of clarity are not only about guidance, they are also about protection. The spiritual world does not pause when the physical world sleeps. While bodies rest, unseen forces remain active, and not all activity is benign. Scripture and spiritual experience alike affirm that there are battles that unfold beyond human perception, conflicts that do not announce themselves but still influence lives, families, and futures. These battles are rarely visible, but they are often felt as sudden heaviness, unexplained urgency, or a persistent inner stirring that refuses to be ignored. It is in these moments that God awakens his children not to alarm them, but to involve them. Awakening becomes a call to vigilance, a summons to stand alert when others are unaware. God does not awaken his children out of fear, but out of trust. When he stirs a heart in the night to pray, it is because he has entrusted that heart with responsibility. This responsibility may be intercession for a household, protection over a family, covering for a future decision, or resistance against an unseen threat. The person awakened may not know the details, and often does not need to. Obedience does not prayer offered in the night is not weakened by the lack of witnesses. It is strengthened by purity of intention. There is no performance in darkness, no recognition to seek, no approval to gain. There is only obedience. The effectiveness of nighttime prayer does not depend on length or eloquence. Even a few minutes offered with sincerity can alter outcomes that will never be traced back to that moment. Many spiritual victories occur quietly, without record, without acknowledgement, yet their effects ripple forward into visible reality. Protection is often recognized only in hindsight, when one realizes what did not happen, what danger was avoided, what harm never reached its target. The soul that responds to God's awakening participates in this unseen protection, becoming a guardian without a title, a watchman without an audience. This role is not glamorous, but it is vital. God's kingdom advances not only through public acts of faith, but through hidden acts of obedience. These awakenings to pray are not always dramatic or intense. Sometimes they are gentle nudges, subtle reminders, quiet impressions that something requires attention. The danger lies not in misunderstanding them, but in dismissing them. Comfort often argues against obedience in these moments, urging the body to return to sleep, the mind to rationalize the interruption, the heart to postpone response. Yet obedience delayed is often obedience denied. The night tests priorities in a way the day cannot. It reveals what matters most when convenience is removed. To respond is to choose trust over comfort, vigilance over passivity, faith over indifference. The act of spiritual vigilance is not rooted in fear of attack, but in confidence in God's authority. Those who pray in the night do not do so because they believe darkness is stronger than light, but because they understand that light must be actively positioned. God does not call his children to be anxious sentinels, but confident participants in his purposes. The night becomes a strategic space where faith is exercised without distraction, where authority is affirmed without opposition, where trust is practiced without interference. In these moments, prayer becomes less about asking and more about standing in truth, standing in alignment, standing in agreement with God's will. Over time, those who respond to these awakenings develop a heightened awareness of spiritual movement. They become more discerning, less reactive, more grounded. What once felt mysterious begins to feel purposeful. The soul learns to recognize when an awakening is an invitation to listen and when it is a call to intercede. This discernment does not come from analysis, but from relationship. The more time spent responding in faith, the more familiar God's patterns become. Fear diminishes, confidence grows, and obedience becomes more natural. The night no longer feels intrusive. It feels intentional. God's desire in awakening his children is never to burden them, but to involve them. He does not reveal battles to overwhelm, but to empower. Participation in unseen protection is not reserved for a select few. It is available to any heart willing to listen and respond. The effectiveness of prayer is not measured by visibility, but by alignment. When a soul aligns with God's purposes in the stillness of the night, it becomes an instrument of peace, even amid unseen conflict. What is done quietly in faith often sustains what is lived publicly in confidence. As clarity before dawn sharpens discernment, and vigilance in the night strengthens spiritual authority, the soul begins to walk differently through the day. Decisions are made with greater awareness. Responses are less impulsive. Peace remains steadier. This is not because every challenge has been removed, but because alignment has been established. The soul that listens in silence and stands in prayer carries that posture forward, shaping how it navigates the visible world. The night becomes a place of preparation, not interruption, where clarity is received and protection is activated long before the day begins. Night has a way of uncovering what daylight carefully conceals. During the day, the soul learns how to function, how to respond, how to endure. Responsibilities demand composure, interactions require strength, and routines encourage forward motion even when the inner world is strained. The human heart becomes skilled at postponing pain, suppressing questions, and silencing fatigue in order to remain effective. But when night arrives and the world grows quiet, the defenses loosen. The noise that once kept deeper feelings at bay fades, and what has been buried begins to surface. Old wounds, unresolved fears, unspoken griefs, and silent exhaustion often rise not because they suddenly appeared, but because the silence finally allows them to be felt. This is not weakness, it is honesty. The night reveals not what is wrong with you, but what has been waiting to be acknowledged. It is precisely in this vulnerable space that God chooses to draw near, not to interrogate, not to accuse, and certainly not to condemn, but to restore. God's approach to wounded hearts is never harsh. He does not expose pain to shame it. He reveals it to heal it. The intimacy of the night allows for a different kind of encounter, one that does not rely on words or explanations. Sometimes there is no instruction given, no correction offered, no insight revealed. Sometimes God simply remains present, and that presence alone carries healing power. In a world that demands constant articulation and justification, the experience of being known without having to explain is profoundly restorative. God does not require you to perform your pain for him to care about it. He does not need you to articulate what hurts for him to touch it. His awareness is deeper than language. Many people misunderstand divine healing because they expect it to arrive dramatically, through sudden change or visible breakthrough. But much of God's healing work is subtle and gradual, occurring beneath awareness rather than in front of it. In the stillness of the night, when the heart is open and unguarded, God works gently, like a physician tending to internal wounds that cannot be treated in the presence of noise. He addresses the roots rather than the symptoms, the causes rather than the manifestations. This is why healing often begins in silence rather than celebration. It does not announce itself. It unfolds quietly, slowly, and intentionally. The soul may not immediately feel transformed, but something shifts beneath the surface. A weight lifts. A memory loses its power. A fear loosens its grip. These changes may go unnoticed at first, but their effects become evident over time. The night is also where emotional honesty becomes unavoidable. When distractions are removed, the heart is left alone with what it has been carrying. This can feel uncomfortable, even unsettling, because it removes the illusion of control. Yet this discomfort is not a sign of danger. It is a sign of exposure, and exposure is necessary for healing. God does not force this process, but he invites it. He waits patiently for the soul to acknowledge what it has been avoiding, not to dwell in pain, but to allow him access to it. Healing cannot occur where access is denied. God's intimacy respects boundaries, but it also gently challenges them. He does not rush the soul, but he does not abandon it to isolation either. His presence in the night communicates a quiet assurance. You do not have to carry this alone. There are moments in the night when God says nothing at all, and yet those moments can be the most powerful. Silence in his presence is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It is reassurance without explanation. It is comfort without condition. For many, this is the hardest aspect to accept, that healing does not always come with understanding. The mind wants clarity, reasons, and timelines, but the soul often needs something different. Rest. God knows the difference. He knows when to speak and when to simply remain. His silence is not absence, it is attentiveness. To sit quietly in God's presence during the night is to experience a form of healing that cannot be replicated through effort or analysis. It is the healing that comes from being fully seen and fully accepted without demand. As healing unfolds in intimacy, it often prepares the soul for what is next. God does not heal merely to restore the past. He heals to prepare for the future. This is where the night becomes not only a place of restoration, but also a place of preparation. For major shifts in life, God often stirs the heart quietly, without announcement or spectacle. These awakenings can serve as subtle signals that a transition is approaching. Not every change arrives suddenly. Many are preceded by a period of internal stirring, where the soul senses movement before circumstances reflect it. God does not surprise his children with change. He prepares them for it. Preparation begins inwardly, long before anything shifts outwardly. When the spirit is frequently awakened in the night, it may be because something new is forming beneath the surface. This does not always mean something dramatic or immediately visible. Sometimes it is a change in perspective, a redirection of focus, or a realignment of purpose. Other times it is the quiet opening of a door that has been closed for a long time, or the gentle. God's preparation is rarely abrupt. He layers understanding slowly, allowing the soul to adjust without shock. The night becomes a space where the heart is gradually oriented toward what is coming, even if it cannot yet name it. Transitions can be unsettling, especially when they are not fully understood. The human instinct is to seek certainty before movement, clarity before obedience. But God often works in reverse order. He prepares the heart before he reveals the full picture. This is not to confuse, but to strengthen trust. When the soul learns to rest in God's guidance without complete information, it becomes resilient rather than rigid. The night teaches this kind of trust. It invites the soul to sit with anticipation without anxiety, to sense movement without rushing toward resolution. This posture is essential for navigating new seasons without fear. God's preparation often involves releasing what no longer serves the next season. In the night, attachments that once felt necessary may begin to feel heavy. Patterns that once felt comfortable may begin to feel restrictive. This is not condemnation, it is transition. God does not remove things abruptly. He loosens their hold gradually, allowing the soul to let go without force. These moments of awakening can bring reflection, evaluation, and gentle discomfort, not because something is wrong, but because something is changing. Growth often feels like tension before it feels like expansion. The night allows this tension to be processed privately, without pressure or comparison. A new season does not always mean a new environment. Sometimes it means a new way of seeing, responding, or believing. God prepares the inner life to sustain what the outer life will require. Without this preparation, change can overwhelm rather than strengthen. That is why God takes time. He does not rush transitions, even when the soul feels ready. His timing accounts for depth, not just desire. The awakenings that accompany preparation are not meant to create urgency, but awareness. They draw attention to what is unfolding quietly, inviting cooperation rather than resistance. As healing and preparation intersect, the soul begins to experience a subtle shift in posture. What once felt heavy begins to feel lighter. What once felt confusing begins to feel purposeful. This does not mean that questions disappear or that challenges are resolved, but it does mean that the heart is no longer bracing against change. Instead, it begins to lean into trust. God's work in the night fosters this shift gently, without force. He does not demand readiness. He cultivates it. Readiness is not about certainty, it is about openness. The intimacy of the night creates space for this openness to grow. Without the pressure of immediate response, the soul can process, reflect, and realign. God's preparation respects the pace of the heart. He knows when to stir and when to let rest. He knows when to heal and when to strengthen. These awakenings are not random disruptions. They are carefully timed invitations into deeper alignment. The soul that responds without fear becomes more attuned to God's movements, more sensitive to his leading, and more grounded in his presence. If something new is beginning to form within you, it may not yet have language or shape. That does not mean it is unclear. It means it is still becoming. God often bursts new seasons quietly, away from attention, allowing them to take root before exposure. The night provides this protected space. It shelters the early stages of transformation from interference and doubt. What is nurtured in darkness can grow strong enough to withstand the light. God's wisdom is evident in this process. He knows that what is rushed often fractures, but what is patiently prepared endures. Healing and preparation are not separate processes. They are intertwined. God heals what would hinder the next season and prepares what will sustain it. The awakenings that accompany these processes are invitations to participate, not burdens to endure. They invite the soul to remain present, attentive, and open. There is no demand to understand everything at once. There is only an invitation to trust that God's work in the night is intentional, compassionate, and purposeful. What he heals in intimacy and prepares in stillness will shape the path ahead long before it becomes visible. Waking early, especially in the depths of the night, confronts the human heart with a truth that is easy to avoid during the day. Independence is an illusion. When the world is active, productivity creates the impression of control. Plans are made, tasks are completed, decisions are executed, and the mind convinces itself that momentum equals mastery. But when sleep is interrupted and the body is weak, the illusion fades. There is no strength to rely on, no schedule to hide behind, no external structure to lean upon. In that fragile moment, the soul is reminded of something essential. Without God, nothing truly lasting can be built. This is not a message of limitation, but of alignment. God teaches dependence not to diminish human agency, but to ground it in truth. True strength does not begin with capacity, it begins with connection. The night strips away the false confidence that comes from routine and replaces it with an honest awareness of need. To begin a day or even to begin consciousness itself in God's presence is to acknowledge that wisdom, love, and direction are not self-generated. Even when the awakening comes long before sunrise, it becomes a doorway into alignment. Standing before God in the night says something powerful without words. I refuse to move forward without you. I refuse to decide, react, or advance on my own understanding alone. This posture is not passive, it is deeply intentional. Dependence is often misunderstood as weakness, but spiritually it is one of the highest forms of maturity. It recognizes that clarity does not come from control, and endurance does not come from effort alone. The soul that learns to depend on God learns to move with discernment rather than impulse, with compassion rather than reaction, with wisdom rather than urgency. God teaches dependence gradually, often through interruption. These awakenings are not random disturbances, they are invitations to recalibrate trust. When the soul is tired, pride loses its grip. There is little energy for self-sufficiency and even less patience for pretense. In this state, dependence becomes natural rather than forced. The heart turns toward God, not because it must, but because there is nowhere else to lean. This is where transformation happens, not through discipline alone, but through surrender. God is not impressed by effort disconnected from trust. He is drawn to hearts that acknowledge their limits and invite His presence into them. Dependence also reshapes how the day unfolds. The soul that has rested in God's presence during the night carries a different posture into the morning. Decisions are approached with greater patience. Challenges are met with steadier resolve. Emotional responses soften because they are not rooted in self-protection alone. This is not because problems disappear, but because perspective changes. Dependence teaches the heart to ask before acting, to listen before reacting, and to wait before assuming. Over time, this posture becomes instinctive. What begins as a conscious choice in the night becomes a way of walking in the day. Responding to these awakenings does not require complexity. The human tendency is to overcomplicate spiritual moments, to believe that significance demands formality or eloquence. But God does not require performance. He responds to presence. Long, elaborate prayers are not necessary. Sometimes they are not even helpful. What matters most is openness. A heart that is willing, attentive, and honest creates more space for encounter than a mind busy crafting words. In the quiet of the night, simplicity becomes strength. A few moments of stillness can accomplish more than hours of distracted effort. Listening is often the first and most important response. Not listening with expectation of audible words, but listening with awareness, paying attention to what rises gently within, the thoughts that carry peace, the impressions that feel weighty without being urgent, the quiet nudges that invite reflection rather than reaction. This kind of listening requires patience. It resists the urge to immediately interpret or analyze. It allows the moment to unfold without pressure. God's communication is not always immediate, and it is rarely rushed. Listening in the night teaches the soul to become comfortable with silence, to trust that meaning does not always arrive instantly. Prayer in these moments is not about filling the silence. It is about honoring it. Speaking calmly without urgency aligns the heart with the rhythm of God's presence. Words spoken in the night carry a different weight because they emerge from stillness rather than momentum. Even simple phrases, acknowledgement, gratitude, surrender, become powerful when spoken without distraction. The soul that prays calmly learns to speak from depth rather than habit. This kind of prayer does not demand outcomes. It cultivates relationship. It does not push God to act. It positions the heart to receive. Writing or noting what comes to mind can also be a meaningful response, not because every thought is divine instruction, but because attentiveness honors the moment. Recording impressions creates space for reflection later, when the mind is more active and discernment can be applied. God does not require immediate obedience to every thought. He values ongoing attentiveness. The act of noting is not about certainty, it is about respect. It acknowledges that something meaningful may be unfolding, even if clarity is still forming. Perhaps the most important response is to resist the urge to fight the moment. Resistance often comes disguised as logic or fatigue, convincing the soul that the awakening is inconvenient or unnecessary. But what is resisted is rarely received. Fighting the moment closes the heart, while acceptance opens it. Acceptance does not mean understanding everything, it means remaining present. Transforming the awakening into a meeting rather than an interruption changes its entire meaning. What felt disruptive becomes intentional. What felt intrusive becomes intimate. Over time, responding in this way reshapes the soul's relationship with God. The night becomes less threatening and more familiar. Fear gives way to trust, and uncertainty gives way to expectancy. Dependence deepens not because circumstances improve, but because connection strengthens. The soul learns that it does not need to manage everything alone. This realization brings rest, not the rest of sleep alone, but the rest of assurance. The prayer that rises from this place is not a conclusion. It is a continuation of relationship. It does not close a moment. It opens a posture. Speaking these words is not about ending an experience, but about carrying its essence forward. Lord, if you awaken me while the world sleeps, I choose to listen. This is a declaration of willingness, not obligation. It affirms freedom rather than submission. Guide me, not because I am lost, but because I trust your direction more than my instincts. Restore me, not because I am broken beyond repair, but because your presence renews what is weary. Prepare me, not because I know what is coming, but because you do. Let my life remain attentive to your voice, even in silence. These words do not demand answers. They express alignment. Silence does not weaken prayer, it strengthens it. God does not measure devotion by volume or length, but by posture. A heart inclined toward him, even without words, speaks louder than any declaration. The night trains the soul in this kind of prayer, where presence matters more than language. Over time, this posture carries into waking hours. The soul becomes attentive, even amid noise, receptive, even amid motion. What is learned in the night transforms how the day is lived. Inviting others into this journey is not about growing numbers, it is about walking together. Faith is not meant to be navigated in isolation. Choosing to remain connected, to subscribe, to stay engaged, to walk alongside others seeking the same quiet depth, creates continuity. It acknowledges that growth is not a solitary achievement, but a shared pilgrimage. In this shared space, reflection deepens, encouragement strengthens, and attentiveness is sustained. The blessing spoken is not a farewell, it is a covering. From the earliest moments of consciousness to the final hours of rest, God's presence remains constant. Whether in the stillness before dawn or the movement of the day, his guidance does not waver. The soul that learns to depend on him in the quiet will recognize him in the noise. What begins as an awakening in the night becomes a way of walking in the light.